Hello, everybody. Hope everyone can see me. Everyone is joining the stage already. Great. So, welcome, everyone. My name is Talita. I'm the founder of Going Far. For those of you who don't know, Going Far is an initiative to help migrant women and non-binary people in Ireland to advance their careers, but also set up their own business if they want to. Obviously, this event is a little bit different. We wanted to reach a broader audience because obviously, like, this is everyone's fight. So that was the idea for this event. You're all very welcome. I'm very excited about this panel. Been waiting quite a long time for it. I just want to touch on the agenda before we begin. So we're starting now at around 6:15. The panel is going to take about 1 hour. Then we're going to have a Q&A for about 20 minutes. So if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you see there's chat, participants, and Q&A. If you go to Q&A, you can send your questions. This is a safe space. Please feel free to ask anything to our speakers that they can help you with. You can also vote for questions that you like. So if you don't have anything to ask, but you see a question that you like, please do contribute in that way. And yeah, and then Sophie is gonna ask the questions that get the most votes. And after that, we're gonna have 30 minutes. So between 7:30 and 8, we'll have some time for networking. So I think we're just missing Toju on the stage. Let me find her. So hopefully she'll join now. Great. Hello, welcome. So welcome everyone, our amazing speakers. I'm very excited. I'm gonna leave to Sophie to run the show, and I'll be back when we are done. There's just one thing that I just wanted to let everyone know, that we're recording this. So we are gonna post this on YouTube probably next week and share it on social. So if you have any friends who missed it, you can send it to them afterwards. All right. So Sophie, is up to you now.
Cool. Thank you, Talita. Thanks so much, Talita, for having me and everybody to join tonight. So as Talita said, I'm going to ask the questions, and then we separate the topic into 3 different main themes. So the first one would be racism in the workplace, and then racism in general, and then the last one will be future. So I'll let you know when we change the theme. So without further ado, just gonna introduce, just with the name, the speakers that we have tonight. So we have Áine Mulloy, Claudia Hoareau, Deborah Somorin, and Toju Duke. And I will ask you to introduce yourself like 1 or 2 sentences. Can start with Áine because she's the first on my screen, so just like
no problem. Hi everyone. So my name is Áine. I'm an innovation design lead at Accenture for the DOC. So that's Accenture's global flagship for R&D and innovation. So effectively, we help C-suites of like big global companies solve complex problems. Besides that, yeah, I would guess I speak a lot on inclusion and diversity, and I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, Claudia.
Hi everyone, my name is Claudia Hoareau, and I'm a speaker and educator and storyteller on anti-racism and inclusion. And yeah, that's pretty much what I do full time. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Deborah.
Hey, so I'm an accountant, but please don't hold that against me. I'm also a consultant. I work in PwC. I work in people strategy. So kind of like what Áine does, I help companies figure out anything to do with people in their organization and ensure it aligns with their strategies. And I also speak about diversity and inclusion, youth homelessness, and I run a charity called Empower the Family.
Cool, that's okay, Deborah. We need the content. And Toju?
Everyone, I'm Toju Duke. I work at Google as a product lead for overseeing EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, on travel. But at the same time, I do a lot of talks and work on artificial intelligence. And I also own a company called Refine, which is really about making businesses grow. I'm happy to be here as well.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. So to go in this topic and start with a question that would do like the best introduction. Could you tell us the time when you faced racism in the workplace of any kind, and what did you do about it? Because we know that we work in big companies and it kind of happened every day on a daily basis. So if you had like an experience to share and how it went for you. Who wants to start? Okay, Claudia, I see you reacting to this.
Okay. So this is interesting because I tried to think of one, because there's been several, and I think definitely worked in a space where I faced sort of accusations that were proven later on to be false, because there was, you know, undeniable evidence like CCTV footage and everything to prove that it wasn't me. But the premise behind the accusations was it must be me because I was the foreign girl, or because I was the black girl, or, you know, this is the kind of language that was used in that particular incident, in that particular instance, and also in the same organization or in the same job. I was the person who was tasked with dealing with any queries or complaints or issues from customers or clients who were also people of color. And so there was this assumption made that I wouldn't be as relatable or as appropriate to deal with white clients or customers as I would be with people of color. So that is just, I suppose, I feel maybe a more general example that I could make, and in terms of what I did about it or the impact it had on me. Honestly, at the time, I was much younger. I was very intimidated by everything that was happening around me, and I didn't do anything about it per se, because I felt that the culture in the organization had already been established. So, you know, I mentioned that I was, say, the person who was tasked with dealing with excuse me, with people of color because I was one. So there was already this culture established that, you know, to sort of single me out in that way. So I felt at that time disempowered to really do anything about it. The impact it had on me, though, I can see now, many years later, has been lifelong. I have, you know, I've gone through the motions of just second guessing myself, doubting myself, severe imposter syndrome, just not feeling like I am performing, feeling like my character is going to be attacked if I make one wrong move, feeling like any wrong move I make is going to be sort of painted or tarnished as, you know, what all Black or brown people do if they'll be hired. And actually, that particular space I worked in then several years ago had a manager who didn't want to hire people of color and was actually open about this. You know, and not because of her experiences dealing with me per se, but her experiences in general, she says. So I just always felt like, you know, gosh, I seem to be responsible for the reputation of all people of color in Ireland. So, you know, all of that was very heavy on my already kind of young and sensitive and low self-esteem bearing shoulders. So yeah, I mean, it's an example, I guess, from when I was much younger. I've had others over the years that I've been a little bit more empowered and stronger to deal with. But just, yeah, I thought that might be a good example for this.
That's a great example. Like, somebody wants to bounce back on that?
Can come in a little bit. There's no particular incident that I faced in the same way. I mean, that sounds absolutely horrific, particularly how brazen it was and how blatant. So I'm really sorry to hear that you went through that, Claudia. I think for me, the difference is that the job that I'm in now is actually the first time I've been in an organization where there's anybody else on the team who is a person of color. I've never ever worked with people of color before in my entire life. To put that into context, I'll be 32 this summer. So immediately walking into an environment where you see other faces that are similar to yours is a very kind of safe space to be in. Actually, it's quite uplifting, and you definitely feel supported. But I think in previous roles, and there's one in particular that springs to mind, because I was the only person of color in that space, I was effectively like almost like the Black Google. If any questions around race, any questions around content, any questions around kind of the responses that we were getting online had a racial kind of conversation or slant, it was immediately on my shoulders to kind of educate not only the team but also the community, respond, be crafting responses. And that often meant that you're actually engaging with really racist rhetoric, and you were the one that had to step in and say, hang on, this is unacceptable. So you are in a position of power, obviously, because you're working for the organization, but you're also in the position where I'm seeing members who are being racist, and as a result of being the Black member of the team, I now have to speak for not only the organization, but also my white teammates, because they were uncomfortable or unwilling to kind of pick that up. It was always like, what do you think? And then the eyes go straight on you, and you have everyone just kind of looking at you. So it's been more instances like that for me, rather than kind of overt racism or negative comments or anything like that. The other instances that I can remember, particularly as a young teen, but I think that happens a lot with Black women in general, is that kind of hypersexualization piece. So I used to work in a bar and restaurants, as lots of teenagers do, and like you were given this uniform that was fine, and it was rubbish and terrible, and everybody always hates your uniform, but there would always be comments passed, particularly by some of the customers and things like that, and some of them would have kind of a slight racial overtone that you get in Ireland, that kind of like subtle, oh, your skin is so chocolatey, or just things like that. So it's like, you're not really saying anything, you're not calling someone the N-word, for example. It's not particularly violent, but it's also very clear that you're commenting on me because of the color of my skin. And things like that were brushed off. But I mean, at 15, 16, when a man is saying something like that to you in your place of work, and it's very clear that he's kind of signaling you out because of your race, not just your gender and your age, because the other girls got it too. I'm not saying that they didn't, but there was always an extra layer there, which we're all familiar with as women of color. So it was things like that. It's like, oh, don't worry about him. He's local. He's this, he's that, he's the other. So it was very much your concerns were dismissed. And it's quite difficult then to battle that. So eventually you just kind of end up getting on with it, really, which can be quite tiring, because as soon as you see that person coming through, or their face kind of going past the windows, they're coming in the door, you can just feel your shoulders tense, and you're just like, oh, I'm going to go to another table, because you don't want to deal with that. So for me, it's been more those kind of subtle things, and then also the recognition of the sigh of relief when you walk into a space where it is much more diverse, and you can see other ethnicities, sexual orientation, people with disabilities, all that kind of thing, much more openly. So it makes it a much more welcoming environment, I think.
Yeah, I totally get it when you say that things are more subtle now. It's like people are talking to you as you were a symbol and not like a person, but you were representing all the Black person you've ever met in your life. And you're like, it's just me, I'm just me, and it's hard enough. So I can't speak on behalf of every Black people of color that you met in your life. That wouldn't be representative. And people have like trouble to see that, that level of, because it's really, really subtle. And to bounce back on this, because you were saying in the workplace, people were doing, they had like that kind of behavior. Did you notice, did some coworkers help you with it, or did they intervene, or what do you think would be the best approach for coworkers to do something about this? And this question for everybody.
So for me, no, like nobody helped. I mean, part of it as well is because when you're in the services industry, your job is to always smile. It's always yes, yes, yes. What else can we do? And when you are kind of like working as a teenager and you want tips and things like that, you always plaster a smile on your face and you just get on with it. So if I opened my mouth, someone would comment, oh, you've got a very strong Irish accent. Where are you from? And it's like, from Mayo, like I'm from this town. But you always have to say it with a smile. You always have to be like, whatever, go, 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 because you're conscious of kind of the dynamic. And the one or two times that I did respond with like an eye roll, it was reflected badly on me, and then I got reprimanded for saying it. So it's kind of that tricky scenario, I think, to kind of balance those power dynamics and understand that, yes, I'm a server in the context of a service industry, and kind of what comes with that, but also recognizing that you're actually now across the boundary for me, so I'm just going to go. So I would generally just kind of put on this like dead smile and just walk away. So I kind of remove myself from the situation a lot. But I think for people who see their coworkers in that scenario, they need to step in and do something. And if they see someone speaking up about it, actually back them a bit as well, because it's much more powerful if you have a couple of people saying, actually, no, I heard that person say that too, and it's really unfair. And if a staff member is upset about something, then it needs to be taken seriously, regardless of how the perceived slight is. If someone's hurt, clearly there's been a wound has been inflicted. So I do think there's I suppose an onus on everyone, because you are teammates ultimately, to kind of have your teams back a little bit in those scenarios, and do kind of add your voice, check that the person's okay, and lend your support how best you can.
And Deborah, do you have something to add? And then Toju was like, she didn't speak at all.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, you know, like there's other ways. For me, it's things like it's similar, you know, it's you're having lunch and someone's like, so Debbie, what?
He's got on mute, I think.
Yeah.
Hear me? Am I back? Oh my
You're
God,
mute.
how much of that did you not get? I'll start.
I did have I'm gonna do something.
So I suppose what I was trying to say was, you know, mine was kind of different in that it was kind of like you're sitting at lunch with your colleagues, and again, I'm not going to say which word, in so many different places, same as Áine. I've been, you know, worked in bars and everything else, but you're having lunch with people that you're your colleagues, that you're friends with, and someone's like, oh, Debbie, so why can't white people say the N-word? And you're like, what is happening? You know, you're emotionally traumatizing me while I'm trying to have my burrito bowl. Like, will you please leave me alone? And it's just really weird, because it is that whole thing of you're then staring at this like table of white people who are expecting you to be the black spokesperson for something that they can Google. Like, you know, it's literally not up to me to tell you why you can't say that word. Google it, educate yourself. Don't put that emotional trauma on other people. And again, it kind of comes back to this, the whole thing on people intervening. You know, in that situation, it'd be like, oh, well, why didn't you say something? Because I did. But, you know, at the same time, I'm known as being someone now, you know, initially I was very scared to speak out and about anything to do with racism. I was very scared to call stuff like that out for what it was, for inappropriate behavior in a diverse environment. But at the end of the day, you know, it's not up to me, to be completely honest with you, because I'm the one being emotionally traumatized in that situation. It's the people around me who know that this is wrong, who don't have the stereotype of the angry black woman to be scared of that will be attached to them. You know, doesn't have the, oh Jesus, she's always going on about race stereotype to be attached to them. It is calling your friend out and saying what you're doing is wrong. You know, that's not okay. So I definitely, you know, in terms of, I've made huge changes in my circles and the people I surround myself with. If you're not someone who would call that out, I just don't want you to be in my life. I'm just, it's emotional work I find with friendships or whatever, you know, it's emotional work you give to people. It's both ways. And this is a huge part of who I am. I would call it out. If somebody was making rape jokes or whatever, or something, you know, I would absolutely call it out. So with this, you know, where it's racism, I just don't understand that reluctance to be an ally in a way that is authentic, you know. So yeah, that was all I was going to add.
No, I think you're totally right. Toju, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you know, I'll probably give my own example because it's slightly different, and you know, you could probably say that wasn't racist, but for me, it was around performance and having a performance review, and you know, it's almost like entrapment. Your manager never gives you feedback for 6 months, and then once it's time for your performance review, you get feedback that is different from what you expected, and the feedback you get is not even constructive, right? You just hear some wishy-washy stuff. It's not acceptable, and you're meant to move on. And for me, like sitting back and thinking about it, and thinking, I realized like statistics also say that Black people in the workplace are less likely to be promoted, unlike the white counterparts. And that's when you find out that this goes back to the systemic injustice and the inequalities that we're fighting here. But it's not glaring, it's not in your face. What did I do about it? I really reflected first, you know, just to find out, was the feedback really relevant? Was it constructive? Did I really have an issue with the way I was walking? But, you know, reflecting and taking a step back, I realized that was wrong. And I was ready to fight. I was ready to go to skip level to my manager's manager and say, I don't want this manager anymore. Not because of the single isolated events of my performance review, but the journey of having the manager as my manager. He wasn't a coach, you know, it always felt like he just wanted to see me fail. And when I failed, that's when he gives me feedback. I mean, there was an instance where I was pregnant in the hospital, right, with the CT scans all over my body, and he still insisted that I write my performance notes for him, you know, for the calibration. And come calibration, he didn't even bring it up, right? And those are the sort of, you know, isolated events that happen that make you think, is this racism? Is it discrimination? What exactly is it? Because you can't really put your finger on it. But fortunately for me, or unfortunately, he left the company. So I didn't need to raise it up, but I still did, right? So when we had an annual survey, I still brought it up, my experience with this manager, coming back from maternity leave and all of that. And for me, it's like just making sure you speak out. If you have any experiences, even if you can't put your finger on it and you don't know exactly what it was, you know, you're not quite sure, is it racism, is it discrimination, what exactly it is, still speak up. Speak to someone else, speak to your teammates, speak to HR, speak to your managers or someone who you can trust, you know, reflect, try to have a sounding board. And you'll find out that the more you speak, you find out, okay, there was actually something wrong there. And if you have any employee resource groups in your workplaces, you know, like we have the Black Googler Network, and I've been with them for the past 7 years. Not the most active member, I've been in and out, but we've managed to transform the experience of Black Googlers in Google, right? We look at retention rates, we look at, you know, how we're hiring the Black race, what's their experience, what's their feedback, and you hear all sorts of stories. But we make sure that we have the right people in senior level that are working on our behalf, advocating for us, right? We have the Black who work very closely with our CEO and with our SVPs to make sure that the voices of the Black, you know, the Black culture and the Black people in the Black workplace is heard. And hopefully, you know, we're seeing a lot of changes slowly but surely. So my point here is speak up. Whatever you go through, you know, don't feel that you're dying inside. Don't feel you're all alone. You'll find out that your experience is not unique. Someone else has experienced the exact same thing. And if everyone comes as a collective group to speak out in the company, there should be changes. And if it's not a great company and they don't listen, get out, go somewhere else. There are other places out there.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think you're like all of the experience are kind of intertwined, and even if it's different, it's always the problem of speaking for yourself, and sometimes you don't want to make a scene, or you're like you're on the table with friends or you're at work and you're like, okay, it's happening again, but I don't want to, you know, you'd be scared to, like, I don't want to be seen again as the person who's going to start a racial conflict, even if there is absolutely a matter of that. And you're right, like, we need to stop this and we need to, like, say it anyway, no matter what, because it's just start by one person speaking that will lead to another one, and hopefully to everybody to be aware of what's going on. And speaking on this, Claudia, you had lots of experience in racism work, like you that's your area. And do you think Ireland has changed since you started in terms of mentalities? Do you think people have changed a bit?
Well, I remember giving my first kind of talk on anti-racism and inclusion probably maybe 17 years ago. And so if I think back to that time, and I think back to most recently in the involved with the Irish Network Against Racism, if I'm honest, yes, there has been a change, but I don't think it's been a positive change. I think one of the things Áine has recorded and seen through from the iReport platform is that there has been not just increased reporting, but increased incidents. I think one of the things in Ireland, for example, is we never really had an organized right-wing or far-right kind of movement in any way, and now we do. Now we have, you know, political parties that are very right in their thinking and very vocal about their anti-immigration and anti-migrant stance. And so that in and of itself is giving all the keyboard racists and all the other people in their local communities a lot more confidence to be, you know, to have these views. And before they might have had them and maybe not have understood them and not have been as vocal. But now that we have political parties and influential people talking very openly about this stuff, it's giving confidence to everybody else. I think in addition to that, I think a huge problem in Ireland is the fact that we don't have hate crime legislation. So it's very difficult to monitor, to report, for things to be done, you know, around kind of racist incidents, not just, you know, kind of physical or verbal ones, but, you know, the stuff that happens online as well with hate speech. So, yeah, I mean, those are the changes we've seen. I think people have definitely become a lot more brazen in their racism. And I think just kind of to add to the points that we've been talking about around, you know, intervention, I think one thing that, you know, a lot of that we see a lot coming through the iReport data is the power and the significance of bystander intervention, and how a bystander or a colleague sticking up for you can actually lessen the impact of the particular incident on you. But also, you know, I think what a lot of white Irish people maybe don't realize is, you know, when they use their voice to intervene and to stand up for somebody, I mean, essentially you're stopping the racist rhetoric. The minute a white person is stepping in, they're not going to receive racism back. They might receive aggro, or they might not. Actually, many times, you know, the person is too humiliated into silence because they didn't expect another white person to step up for you. But if you are all the time leaving it to the person of color to be the one stepping up and speaking for themselves and educating the room and doing all of that work, the only thing they get back is the same racist rhetoric. So I think there's real power in that certainly in Ireland, I think people don't realize as much. And again, I'm saying this, you know, specifically because we see it in the data. You know, for example, a large number of racist incidents happen on public transport in Ireland. And in many of these recorded cases, you'll find people say, you know, nobody on the whole packed bus, nobody said anything. And the feeling that leaves people with isn't only nobody stood up for me, but it's also, okay, I'm now telling myself that they all must agree. So suddenly in your head, you're not just looking at the one racist guy, you're thinking, well, there's clearly a bus full of racist people because they all must agree. It must be true. You know, what he said must be what they all think. So, I mean, I think definitely as, you know, people are starting to know more about the likes of Áine, or, you know more about the iReport, we're able to collect more data. But like I mentioned earlier, it's very difficult because we don't have hate crime legislation in this country. People don't realize that you can report to the guards, which of course you can, but even that is somehow difficult because there's no legislation for the guards. So, you know, we have general legislation around theft. So if something is stolen, you can report it to the guards. There's codes under which they can record all this. If there's a racist incident, there isn't a legislation, there isn't a framework in which they can record all this. So oftentimes the incidents have to be recorded as something else. So assault, for example, or antisocial behavior or something like that. It can't be named because of the lack of the legislation. So I think that's yeah. I mean, changed, yeah. For the better, not so much. But I'm hopeful. I don't want to sound all doom and gloom. I do think, there's a lot happening. I do think we've also seen the rise in diversity and inclusion as a standalone function, not necessarily something that used to exist as part of a HR function, for example. Now, people seem to be taking it a lot more seriously. I think there's still a lot of space, though, to lift out racism from that and have it focused on as a standalone in and of itself, and have it taken out of this dimension of the 9 grounds of discrimination. I think what Ireland has done really well over the years is, been able to take out LGBT rights, for example, and focus on it and protect people a lot better in spaces around that. And I think that set a really good precedence for how we can do that for racism.
Thank you, Claudia. That was lots of valuable information there, and some people are talking about it. So that's great. Deborah, this question is for you. You recently wrote an article about intersectional allyship. Could you tell us more why it's important and what it is for people who might not know?
Yeah, so I suppose intersectionality is just how I view diversity and inclusion. I don't view it as a single issue. For example, I'm gay, but I'm Black, but I'm a mom, but I'm also a single parent, and everything else that comes with that. I'm an accountant. There's a lot of things that intersect there. And so for me, in terms of the different spaces I sit in, for example, I sit on the Chartered Accountants Ireland Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and we're shaping what the D&I proposition for the industry overall will be, and we're trying to lead from the front on that. And for me, I've been really fighting to make sure that the events we had were intersectional going forward, because I don't feel included in a gender conversation. I don't feel included in an LGBT only conversation. I don't feel included in a parenting only conversation. Race are huge parts of those conversations. A white woman and a Black woman's experience of sexism are going to be different. Actually, you know what? One Black person and another Black person's experience of racism, even racism, will be different based on gender and so many disability, like so many other things come into it. And so intersectional allyship is really important, because when you look at people like J.K. Rowling, who think it's okay to stand on some sort of high horse of, oh, I'm a feminist, but I'm just transphobic. No, you're either calling for equality and inclusion of everybody, or you're not. It dilutes your message to be out there trying to call for people to treat you as an equal and treat you fairly, while not also supporting other people who are asking for the exact same thing. So that's what intersectionality and intersectional allyship means to me. It means you're getting into this, you're supporting people for their visible and invisible differences, regardless of what they are, and trying to be an ally and a voice for them. Yeah.
Thank you, Deborah. Anyone wants to say something about it? You can raise your hand if somebody wants to say something. No? Okay, fine. And for the people that are listening, if you have questions, you can put it in the Q&A. And we'll go through that a bit later. So I didn't say that we changed the topic. We were talking about workplace and then racism in general. So I'm sorry, but I think you understood, everybody. So now we can talk about what could happen next. Because Deborah, you were talking about intersectionality and how we should embrace diversity. I think now we have a momentum of people are keen to, learn more about this and educate themselves, as you were saying as well, that people should do this. And do you guys have thought on how we could keep that going and not lose the momentum that we have now with all the Black Lives Matters movement?
Yeah, so I'm working on a couple of bits, but in particular, I think that it will be a huge disappointment if we don't align ourselves in terms of legislation around hate crime legislation and also dual ethnicity and pay gap, gender pay gap reporting. I suppose to give you an example of that, we do that in PwC UK. All the big four accounting firms in the UK report on their ethnicity gap and also their gender gap. And in the UK, the BAME pay gap is 34.7%. And that's the difference, that's the pay gap between what white employees are paid and what BAME employees are paid in PwC UK. So if we're not measuring these things, how do we know if things are fair? How do we know if we have inclusive environments? How do we know if we have inclusive hiring and progression and, you know, pay processes? We need to start measuring those things. And also, obviously, like Claudia said, hate crime legislation is a thing that, again, that's where the intersectionality comes in, because that was one of the main things in the LGBT report that they did in terms of their next steps in 5 years ago. So it's absolutely ridiculous that everything else has been ticked off the list but that. But I do think, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that that is something that is expected now within the next few. It was one of the things from the program for government that would be incoming. So that's a welcome step. And I think getting organizations to start collecting their data on ethnicity and measuring that data and ensuring that there isn't a problem, I think is really important. I think it's really again, I'm going to come back to my intersectionality argument. There's no gender is the gateway first. You know, what's that about? You know, we're either calling for equality of everyone, or we're saying we only care about equality for people who represent 50% of the population first, and then everybody, like, that's ridiculous. You know, that's not diversity. That's just half the population. It's another majority, you know. So you're not doing anything for minorities and advancing minorities in the workplace by bringing in gender pay gap legislation. It's just not, it just doesn't cut it anymore. So given the UK are so advanced on this, I'd be really disappointed that we'd be taking baby steps and starting with gender, because they're already advancing towards both.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're like the way we monitor all that should be more advanced and not just a check on the book and being like, oh, we look shiny. We have a diversity and belonging thing, department in the company that actually doing nothing and doing like a market every quarter or something. Like, this is not what we're talking about. So, Toju, you wanted to go? You can go ahead.
Sorry. I think for me, like, no one is born racist, right? Like, kids are not born racist. It's institutionalized. It grows in them, right? And I realized that, you know, in Ireland, 2 literature books that they study in school have the N-word. Because I couldn't understand why the N-word is used here pretty frequently. And so it just means that, you know, racism right now, it's back to the systemic injustice we're talking about, right? It's in the systems across different industries. And I think, you know, I believe all of us should be part of the solution. It's very hard for me to sit down and say, hey, the government should do this, when many times I know they wouldn't. But I think we can help educate the government. So for me, it's like, you know, start from your little network, your little sphere of influence. If you want to be an ally, educate yourself. Read more about the Black race. Read more about the history. Read more about the systemic injustice. Educate yourself about white supremacy and white privilege. And what exactly does that mean? If you have a Black person in Ireland, you know, do not see them as a guest. You know, I saw a comment the other day where someone said, you know, if I invite someone to my living room, are they going to tell me where to sit? Sort of thing. Like, why don't you accept that the world is for everyone? And why do you feel that you're more superior to someone else because of the color of the skin? And if you start by educating your kids or even your family or your friends and have these conversations, right, that's the first step towards being an ally. You know, you're talking it through, you're trying to understand, what do your friends think about everything that's been going on? What do your friends think about, you know, having a Black person in Ireland? And, you know, do they actually think, well, one of you, like, are we one big family, or are we just, they're Black, we're white, I'm better than them? Now, I think it goes beyond that, right? Even in the industries that you work in. So, like, Deborah has brought up a good point. You know, she talked about the gender pay gap. She works in PwC. Like, you know, I want to believe that she's going to drive that. You know, if you work in media, how about splashing some more images of Black people and not just white people, or white men and women? You know, because it's all subliminal messaging, right? The more things you see, the more images you see. That's what we're used to. Or we have the example of nude leggings. You know, as a Black woman, I can never wear nude leggings because that color just doesn't fit the color of my skin. And I couldn't understand why. So it was like, how do we make the fashion designers and the, you know, people in the fashion industry to actually start thinking of the minority groups? They may feel that they're not going to make a lot of money out of minority groups, but still have a diverse product, right? Still have diverse businesses. Or how do we educate even Black people, Black entrepreneurs who have been sitting on that business idea for so many years and say, hey, rise up. You know, that unique makeup set that you thought of, that you wanted to create for people of color, right, to match their skin tones. Maybe it's time to do that. Then we talk about the venture capitalists who actually help prompt these businesses. Or we talk about the government who actually provide brands and funding for Black businesses, right, because they fit within this. So I think it's a whole societal change that we have to do. And I think, you know, we have to really think about how far we want to go. You know, AI is another bit on the tech side. But I want to believe, I really want to believe that if we start doing this, hopefully 100 years from now, we're not still going to be having this conversation. Because I got really frustrated when, you know, I thought about all the things Martin Luther King did and, you know, coming from the slave era and all of that. I was still having these conversations today. We've probably made very little progress. And I don't want my kids to still be having these conversations many years from now.
I think you made a really good point on a societal problem of the lack of role model that we have when we're kids of Black representation in the media or anywhere. Like, I've never seen a Black Barbie when I was a kid. Everybody was like doing the same, no? Like they were putting the same makeup, as you said, brushing their hair. I was like, there's nothing for me here because it doesn't exist. Like, I can go to the shops, they have literally nothing because we're a minority and they just don't think about it when they create the models. I think you're right for kids, especially in the media and in the representation that we have, to have like all of this different this different person of color, so they exist everywhere, they're here as well. Like, you're not on your own in an ocean of white kids. So it's I really love that point. Maybe Áine, you have something to add, and then Claudia.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things at the moment in Ireland that are happening. Obviously, with the wave that was kind of with the protests and things that happened in the US of late, and then they kind of spread around the world, which is fantastic to see, that kind of movement or communication, as some people are phrasing it now, as opposed to a movement. But I think what we're seeing in Ireland is kind of unique. In some senses, people feel because we're not lynching Black people on the street, we don't have a history of racism here. And there's a real kind of steadfast, the violence hasn't hit a level that indicates racism as a problem. And then we also have that kind of whole thing of, well, the Irish were slaves too. Actually, no, they weren't. They were indentured servants. And it's quite a complex history when you are a country that has been colonized as opposed to being a colonizer, and kind of what the reflection and impact of that is. And then also from the Irish mythology side and kind of the perception of Ireland as the Aisling and all that stuff comes through, particularly when you're speaking to people who have those kind of more right-wing tendencies in Ireland. A lot of it's really rooted in this kind of Celtic mysticism idea. But I think the main issue, or not the main, but one of the issues that we're seeing now in Ireland in particular, is just the power imbalance. So obviously when there was kind of this flurry of Black people being put into the media spotlight, obviously Emma De Beer did a fantastic piece for the Irish Times. Every single magazine and paper was kind of rushing to fill the pages and push out lists of 10 amazing Black creatives to follow, 10 amazing this, 10 amazing that, 10 amazing the other. But that is not kept up. I mean, you can already see it's already gone. They're not continuing to kind of keep those voices and all the other voices that they didn't include in those lists all the time. So it's not a steady trickle. In Ireland, it's just like, gone, gone. So it's actually, how do we keep that momentum going, and how do we keep those voices? They're doing phenomenal work. So it's not a case of quality of talent or quality of output or anything like that. It's just in case of inequality and opportunity. And the same people that are talking about it will often be talking about the gender piece, but the race piece very rarely comes in. And that's a real shame. But with the Programme for Government, they did put together now a new committee looking at race and things like that. But if you look through the people that they've actually put in, and the name of the committee is completely gone out of my head, so I apologize for that. But if you look it up, you'll find it. But what they've effectively done is put white people who are quite senior in their career, have very strong backgrounds, academic backgrounds. One of them, ironically, actually works for a company that provides paid-for prisons in the US, so I'm not sure what their insight is. But the level of seniority of the white people versus the level of junior kind of in relationship of the people of color on that committee, what is going to come out of that that's actually impactful? There's nothing, because while those people have lived experience, which is hugely important and hugely powerful, what they actually needed was to equal out the power dynamics. So you have Black people who are senior in their career, who've been working in this space for years and who have the kind of credentials that it requires to stand up against someone who is white, the same credentials. I'm not saying that youth voices should be discounted, because actually what they should have done is bring in youth white voices, youth people of color, youth travelers. They should have really done the broad spectrum of kind of race and identity in Ireland. But it just really speaks to that piece of, in Ireland, it's very tokenistic, it's very performative, and it doesn't really get to that layer beneath what's the systematic problems that we need to change and what's the actual cultural piece that we need to change. It's just here's some brown faces, be happy about it. And the work beneath is still not being done, because effectively we have a system that gatekeeps people out. And while people are happy to kind of be seen to be in the media and keep following those trends, and as the Google trend for media blows up, they'll follow that wave. But actually the underlying work underneath is what's the difficult part, and that's what's so exhausting for people of color, because they're constantly living in that spectrum underneath, where they're being attacked on the street, where, you know, their windows are being put in, where their cars are being burnt, they've graffiti scrawled on their walls. And as Claudia was saying earlier, there is no framework to categorize all that, so it's just seen as assault. But it's not assault. Like if someone punches you in the face, or if someone punches you in the face while calling you the N-word, they're two very different things, and they come from very different places. And until we actually recognize that and create a systems, not just a singular system, but actually a network of systems that allows those pieces to be peeled back, and that the power dynamic is key in this in Ireland, that the power dynamic is equal in those conversations, we're not going to get anywhere. Because all the thing that we're going to get out of this committee is, here's some structures that have been effectively created by people who are white in power, with some slight add-ons by young people of color, which are fantastic, but they're not going to have the same language, they're not going to have the same input, they're not going to have the same ability to push back when they see harm could potentially be done, because they don't have the same framework, they don't have the same knowledge. So again, it's kind of like putting a bandage on a stab. Like, that's not going to do anything, just peel it off, it's gone, because there's that lack of like actual drive to make sure that this is actually an equal power weighting, and that power piece is something that we have not addressed at all, and it's not something that's being addressed by any government that we've had so far, or the mess of the government that we have at the moment, because it's frankly not a priority. It doesn't feel like a priority to any of our governments. Even when we had Leo Varadkar, who was hailed around the world as being LGBT, person of color, etc., and his policies did not reflect that. So, I mean, there's that phrase, not all skin folk are kinfolk. And I think that was a prime example of actually there's a real issue there, but between what people are perceived to be saying and the actions that are happening on the ground. And until that's addressed, I don't really know how much further we'll actually get in a real way. I think you're on mute, Sophie.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I was saying, Claudia, do you want to add something to this?
yeah, oh my gosh. I was shaking my head so much when you were talking, Áine. I think I've given myself whiplash. Oh my goodness, you're just, yeah, everything you have said, everything you've all said. I mean, I think what's interesting in that's happening in Ireland that concerns me a little bit in terms of how we progress this work, just to add to everything you've said, Áine, is also the fact that all the education and everything that we're consuming right now is really American-centric, okay? And so when we, and of course, most of that some of that for the most part can be universal, and it's definitely stuff that we can take in, but we're not actually centering the Irish experience and the Irish context when we're looking at interventions. So for example, we have really specific examples in Ireland of a history of systemic racism. So when we look at direct provision, like the way we're managing it here is very specific to Ireland. When we look at the abuse of mixed race babies in mother and baby homes and Magdalene laundries, like all that stuff is really specific to Ireland. And I think unfortunately Ireland has had a history of putting some of that stuff that they consider ugly, in institutions and behind walls. And so even until that is kind of acknowledged and owned, it's very difficult to properly, in a real way, move on. Because Áine, the committee you're talking about is the Anti-Racism Committee. That's what it's called. And it's, Áine had been invited to join it, and, we're not entirely sure what we're going to do right now, because we've been calling for all the things you've kind of described, better representation of ethnic minorities and different things like that. But I mean, my feeling is the same. What is that committee actually going to achieve? Because for one, as you've mentioned, the power balance is completely off. But the power balance being off in that committee, I feel, is reflective of Irish society. The power balance is off in general. I mean, there's an unfair distribution of opportunities, of power, and then subsequently of wealth and of standard of living. That distribution is completely unfair, and people of color then, continue to remain somewhat under the radar, or somewhat, less likely to be able to avail of these opportunities. So, I mean, I think there needs to be far deeper recognition of some of the issues we're dealing with than there is right now. A lot of the stuff is very surface level. A lot of the stuff is kind of trendy at the moment. This is one of my criticisms of D&I as well. Like they've become buzzwords. They're very trendy, but just like the way intercultural integration was kind of trendy maybe 5-6 years ago. So what then? We seem to get bored of stuff really quickly. So how do we kind of keep it up? I think it needs to be embedded. I think, like I said earlier on about pulling racism out of just, D&I strategies, or, this understanding that if you say you're an equal opportunities employer, that's you done, that's your tick box checked. I think there's something about naming it and owning it and being really targeted about the approach that's needed, that isn't being done yet, that's concerning.
Yeah.
Add one thing to that though. Like, I think that for me, one of the really concerning things in terms of the power dynamics that are there, again, absolutely take that point huge I agree. But I wanted to do an intersectional pride event last year. And when I went to email all of the CEOs of those organizations, every single one of them were white men. Every single one of them. So I'm like, if we can't get to the top of those types of organizations, there's nowhere. It's honestly a sinking ship. So I suppose for me as well, I see it in the advocacy groups. Listen, it's great that they're doing the work and they're supporting and everything else. But I see the behaviors that we're talking about being displayed by some of the people who are in leadership positions and who are the gatekeepers in these organizations. And I think we need to get better at calling that out as well, and making sure that the people speaking for us, the people representing us, have a qualification and are appropriately the right people to do that. This isn't Chinese whispers. I don't need a white man telling me what my experience is as a Black woman. I don't need a white man telling me what the Black experience in Ireland is. I need a Black person educating me on that. Even on this call, I'm being so educated listening to every single person on this call, because we are all absorbing this movement and viewing this through completely different perspectives and different lenses, and I've been in this kind of fairy tale world again, because probably similar to Áine, you're trying to balance two worlds. I have white parents, I have Black parents, my son is white and Black, so I have to be very careful in how I speak about it at home, how I speak about it even with my own family, so I make sure I don't offend people. So absolutely, listen, I think this is incredible. We all have to learn. I think, you know, definitely for me, it's an appreciation for the fact that we need to do better in calling that stuff out when we see it.
Yeah, I think so. I could just bounce off before Sophie responds. I obviously have a similar kind of family scenario in which my mother is Black and my father is white Irish. So I think growing up, that obviously leaves you sort of with a foot in two camps a little bit. You're most definitely kind of othered in that space. But I do think it's a case of just creating a network around you. Like I have lost friends along the way just for various reasons, not necessarily just because of the stuff they said is racist, but also some of it is like super misogynistic. And there's lots of reasons why I'm just like, actually, do you know what? No, I've said my bit to you. I've tried to be like, look, you're wrong for X, Y, and Z, but at some point you just need to remove yourself from that individual and from that scenario, because you can only do so much. I mean, ultimately the person needs to make that decision for themselves. But I do think it is important that, like, from a young age, people are starting to kind of show their kids and tell them stories from around the world. We were very fortunate to grow up with parents who really pushed reading on us. That was like a big part of our family and part of our family life. Our house is full of books, but they weren't just all Irish books. Like there was a lot of Irish stuff, a lot of Irish mythology, all that stuff. But we also were reading books from all around the world, from Africa, from the States, from Britain, from Asia, from various countries therein, Russia. Like, so it's not just a case of you're seeing one lens. And I think that's the thing what we're seeing now is people will say that they're well-read or rational or logical, but these are all code words for saying I have a Western white education, and that's the lens that I'm seeing. I did recently get into an argument, which is not uncommon for me, with a friend around this topic, and just the way he was speaking, I was just like, you're just so representative of like the college education that I got, and it was so narrow. So I just asked him the question, when was the last time, the last 2 years, that you read an author that wasn't white and Western? And he couldn't. So then I just told him, well, in that sense, your worldview is so narrow. It's so narrow, and that's the end of it. Because if you're only reading authors that look exactly like you, that speak like you, that come from the US, the UK, maybe Ireland, if you're in that kind of sphere, that's what, like 4 countries? Like, that's so limited. If you think of like the plethora of the world experience. So you can't really say, I wouldn't consider myself well-read, because there's so many books out there. And I do remember as a child being like, I want to read all the books in the world, until my father crushed my dream by saying, well, the printing press was invented. So no, that's not going to happen. But you do need to be looking out at what else is out there. I mean, particularly now with the internet, if you have access to the internet, it couldn't be easier. Obviously, you should be supporting independent bookshops, but just Google it, order your book, get your book, absorb, read. And I think if you're really just looking for those ones that are trendy, or those ones that are notable authors in the space around logic or rationality or free speech, is like such a red flag, because actually a lot of those people were propagating values for a very small section of society. They weren't even saying free speech is for all people, or even all white people. They were saying it's for white upper class men. So in that sense, it's kind of like, where's the knowledge that you're consuming coming from? And also, what's the kind of counterbalance to that? Is there an argument out there that's being validated, that's being supported? And can I also explore that? I'm not saying that you shouldn't explore those, but you should be just constantly looking, okay, where's the counterpoint to this? What else is out there? Are people having this discussion? Everything you've thought of in your mind has probably been discussed before. So there's definitely opportunity, I think, now more than ever, to get engaged and get involved, and to educate yourself. Like, it's really not on people to keep educating you. At some point, you do need to be proactive on it.
Thanks, Áine. And bouncing back on this and education and resources, like, what do you think is the best resources for people to be anti-racist and to have like that open mind, or at least know what's going on out there, and not, as you were saying, what do you think would be the best resources to learn about it?
Say straight out, if you haven't read Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, it needs to be #1 on your list. It was I don't know, someone will probably be able to come up with something, but I am yet to find anything that has mobilized me and educated me enough about racism, about how history has just been, how Black people have been completely written out of history, or our history has been rewritten for us, you know, and how a lot of the stuff that we think that we know about race is wrong, even as people of color. So I really love that book. So number one.
Thank you, Deborah. Toju?
Media for me is my best source. Not just reading articles, right? So you read articles from different people, but then you get to see the comments. The comments are eye-openers for me, because I get to see how people think, right? Either in Ireland or in the US or even in Saudi Arabia, how they think about this fight or this movement or everything that's going on. How do they think about and perceive people of color? How do they think about white supremacy? And yeah, I've just seen, it's been an eye-opener. I've seen so much information out there. Google's another one. Like, if you're looking for, I always go to Google. My friends laugh at me, but like, you know, if you're just looking for any information, just think of the keywords and just go on Google and search it up. Because the books are a good resource as well. Because social media is always changing, and you know, you always get information every day. I go on LinkedIn, I go on Instagram, I go on Twitter, and those are my sources. And so far, so good. It's fed me enough information that I need right now.
Thank you, Toju. Claudia?
I think, yeah, there's so much out there. I love anything by Rachel Cargill. She has great stuff. Of course. There's another lady whose name escapes me, but her name on Instagram is The Rooted Goddess. Dr. Tamara, somebody, not sure, but she has some really good, actually Rachel Cargill and The Rooted Goddess have really good free courses online for effective allyship and just, you know, also kind of how to, tips and ways to look after yourself in this movement as a person of color. In addition to those, I think I'd urge people, kind of echoing my earlier point about a lot of the stuff being very American-centric and not you know, very Irish. I think I'd urge people to maybe look at, you know, Áine, for example, have a really good resource on Ireland, racism in Ireland, and it just contextualizes it a little bit. They have a guide as well for responding to racism. But there's also really good stuff like there's Dear Daughter, the story of Christine Buckley, which is a short piece people can watch. There's another piece on YouTube about mixed race children that focuses on Rosemary Adair and Jude Hughes. So these are all kind of Irish aspects, I suppose. I know, you know, maybe don't have an awful lot of kind of novels and things, but there's lots of bits and pieces out there that people can look at and watch. There's also, you know, the Children's Ombudsman released a report only this week on the experiences of racism faced by children in direct provision, and they've made a lovely video. Well, it's not lovely, it's actually, it's not lovely at all. It's really, really hard to watch, but you know, all that stuff is there, and it focuses the conversation back to Ireland. So I'd urge people to maybe have a look at that stuff too.
Sure, Claudia. And last but not least, Áine?
There's a couple. I think if you're looking for something that really focuses on the Irish context and sort of grounds it in the global context, I see Talita's put the link in, but Emma DeBerry's Don't Touch My Hair is a fantastic book, and it really weaves the personal and the universal, and it's just, oh, it's incredible. And I think it's similar in a way to Edo Lodge's book, Why I'm No Longer Talking About Race, because it has that kind of data and history layer like wrapped in, oh, it's just so, it's incredible, it's amazing. Definitely buy that. I think the other thing that's really good to read is White Fragility, that's also fantastic. There's a couple of TED Talks, Kimberly Crenshaw's on intersectionality. It's a little bit old now, but I think if you're looking for that intersectional lens, excuse me, that's really good. And then Verna Meyer's TED Talk as well is really good. She talks about her experience listening to the warmth in the sun, which is a fantastic piece. But I think you need to have a little bit of context before you kind of go to that, because it kind of charts the mass exodus, I suppose, of 6 million people from the American South to the American North, and kind of the brutality that they face. So I would kind of say that's maybe like learning 2.0, because it's going to have a little bit more of an entry point. So those ones are all great. I think there's actually so much great stuff on TED that's really, really useful. Again, a lot of it has that American lens. So if we're considering in the Irish space, there's people even like Erica Cody, who's a musician, speaks a lot on race. And then also Dr. Ebon Joseph. She used to teach Black Studies, I think is in UCD, but she runs a lot of webinars and lots of series, and she's very vocal online. And again, she comes from that data point of view, and actually what's the systemic viewpoint kind of mixed in with personal experience. But I think it's a case of really just expanding. So like I actively kind of refresh my Instagram or my Twitter feeds and make sure that kind of the balance in terms of perspective is not just all people that look like me, or not just all white people. So if you're feeling, as you're scrolling through your feed, actually the last 50 photos have all been white people, go follow 5 people of color, go follow some people who are trans, go follow some people with disabilities, because actually, first of all, it's just like your aesthetic is just like, oh my God, this is off the charts. But second of all, you get that information via osmosis. So Rachel Cargill's fantastic. Is it I Heart Erica? Is great. They are a non-binary individual. I think they're post breast cancer, but they do a lot of IGTVs on sexuality and gender and race, and kind of all mixed together, and it's just fantastic. So I think as you start to follow people, it'll start to, the way algorithms work, they'll start to recommend you more people, and you can just kind of go on a little self-led exploratory adventure. And I think that's actually really fun and really enriching way to explore things as well.
Awesome, thank you. So you mentioned a lot of names, all of you. I don't know if people have been able to keep up with this, but if not, I think you can maybe put some of them in the chat so people can have a look, and maybe have a look later tonight if they want to see all those names that you mentioned and all those books. So thank you so much, Áine, Claudia, Toju, and Deborah. And we have some questions in the chat. So now it doesn't make any sense in the order. So I'm just gonna read that as it comes. How can a white person interfere in a racist situation without coming across as a white savior? So who wants to take the lead on this one? You can see the question on the Q&A.
I'm super confused by that one, because white saviorism is when like people go out of their way to highlight this thing that they've done. So for example, my understanding of white saviorism is the person who goes on their holiday to Africa and takes all the pics with the black kids and is like, oh Jesus, I'm great after going over and helping the black kids. Look, I'm touching a black child in Africa and I great. You know, all of these things. So for me, that's white saviorism. It is performative allyship. There, you know, just look up what performative allyship is and don't do that. And just look at what they say for the authentic allyship one and do that. You know, for there's never a situation, and especially when people are well intentioned, you know that, you know, you're not going to. There's no scenario where someone would be stacking up for me where I'd be like, you're a white savior. Like, there's no scenario, you know, if it's come from a good place, then it's very clear it's come from a good place. There's an acknowledgement and things that come with that. So I suppose the big thing with that is don't be so worried about what other people are going to think. If you think that's saying something, if you see something that's wrong, call it out. You know, it's that simple, you know. And I the same thing, you know, Jada Pinkett Smith did this like red table talk on it, but you know, it's that whole thing of there's this whole feminist and, you know, sexist and all of this other stuff, and that stuff that we're all happy enough to call out. Same point again, but you know, racism, racist, that becomes a whole thing where we're scared, you know, of things like white saviorism, you know, could be accused of it. Just if you see something wrong, call it out. That's all.
I'm gonna add as well, like, I believe that's what allyship is all about. Fighting for what you believe and fighting for racism or fighting against racism, right? And to be fair, it's not going to be all, you know, green grass, lovey-dovey, summary. It's the same kind of, or very similar kind of experiences you probably get that, you know, people of color get. You know, you'll feel that people call you the white savior, and you know, it sounds like you're scared or you don't want to be secluded and called out for it, but that will be the sacrifice you have to make, because we're all in this together, and we do need allies. Because like Claudia said, if it comes out stronger when, you know, you're talking to someone who knows you as opposed to a Black angry woman, right? And that's what allyship is all about. So it's something that you need to think about, you know, what exactly do I need to do? How do I want to do it? And am I ready to take the brunt of it when it happens? But it will happen, and something that you should be ready for.
Anybody wants to bounce back on that, Claudia, or what's saying you?
Yeah, I think in case, like, as Deborah was saying, like, white savior is a very specific thing, and it's really rooted in racism itself. It's really this idea that, like, the poor Black babies that you see on the troker box, and I'm going to go fix the problems in Africa with my no knowledge of the country, or the continent rather, sorry, or what the systemic issues, or even construction 101. But here I am building houses, and isn't it fantastic? Like, what are you doing there? No, go home. But the difference, I think, is if you actually see an instance happening in front of you, that it's not white saviorism to say, hey, stop. That's just being a decent human being. And honestly, I think if you're so afraid of how you're perceived in the face of violence being enacted on someone else, I think you need to maybe just have a little bit of a think as to, like, where that's coming from. And it's a good kind of start just to be a little bit introspective there and to consider, well, like, why do I feel fearful to help someone else? Is it that the anger will be directed onto me? Because if it's white and it's a racist incident, the anger is not going to be directed onto you. You're not the object of the kind of the racist incident. So actually you have a power there that should be used in a good and positive way to say, actually, no, I can see a peer is acting in a way that's inappropriate, offensive, racist to someone else. I'm going to use my power in a positive way today. And a simple stop, a simple no, even a simple, I can see what you're doing, is often enough to diffuse that situation. And as Claudia said, the person was embarrassed and generally stops.
Thank you, Áine. The next question is, what do you think is the best way to educate the next generation about racism? Any resources for children you would recommend? Guys?
I have a children's book that's going to be out next September, so please buy that. That's all. I'm joking, but well, no, that will be it. But you know, I suppose one of my friends who's African American has this really beautiful thing where everything that she gives her kid, everything he consumes, whether it's a book, whether it's a TV show, there has to be a Black child in it, because she wants to make sure he's not growing up thinking, why am I not represented there? So steps like that are great resources for kids. You know, great things to do where you're making sure that what they consume is inclusive. You know, so yeah, that's a good one, but I don't know if somebody else probably has really great other recommendations.
Well, I don't have a kid, so I wouldn't know.
I think, yeah, there's a couple of really lovely books that I've got my little girl in the last year. I mean, there's a lot of stuff by the illustrator Vashti Harrison, and she's illustrated the book Sulwe by Lupita Nyong'o. And there's Little Leaders. So she has this range of books, Little Leaders, Little Dreamers. You know, so some of those are really good because they just kind of highlight people from all around the world, you know, who've done incredible things. And it's great that kids get to see themselves represented. I do think, you know, if we're talking about the best way to educate the next generation, I do think it's, you know, we probably need to look at our current education system and how it looks. And this is probably bigger work or bigger picture kind of work, but you know, it's completely necessary. We don't really learn. I actually spoke to a friend of mine who's Nigerian yesterday, who told me, who went through the school system in Ireland, and who said that she knows so much about American history, because she learned it in school and did it for her leaving cert. And so if she could do that, and if her education on history was not singularly about Ireland, but another country's history could be introduced, then what's the excuse for not having a broader education and exposing kids at a younger age to history from all around the world, colonial history, because all of that explains and because so much racism is rooted in colonial history, it's a good way of starting to unpack all of this for kids. So I think, I think that's what I think. I think overall, what I would say, and also just in relation to the previous point, I agree with all the ladies, and I would just also say that I think people need to check their defensiveness sometimes, not just their privilege. I think, especially if you're confusing white saviorism for allyship, I think there's something there that you need to check around your own defensiveness, because feeling accused or feeling defensive about or worrying about how somebody might perceive your action is going to stop you or hinder you from dismantling the oppression even further, because you're going to keep in your lane thinking that that's the safe space. So in order to step out of that and to acknowledge your privilege, you need to unpack a little bit why you're feeling so defensive. Sorry, I just wanted to add that to the previous point.
No, great point. Somebody wants to react on this? Okay, so let's get to the last question. So it's about the workplace. So as well as collecting and analyzing data in the workplaces, what else could employers do to look into and address their processes and working practices for structural discrimination, racism? That's a long one.
To their Black employees, their minority employees. This is ridiculous. Like, if I was going to set up an initiative about disability, I would not be like, right, me and all these other abled people should be the person shaping what this should be or reviewing our policies for if they're inclusive for disabled people. I would go and ask people who are disabled if they wanted, ask them, not make them, ask them if they wanted to be involved in that process of reviewing it and making sure it was as inclusive as it could be for disabled people, if that makes sense. I wouldn't try and speak for them. So, if you're trying to make sure that your environment is inclusive for minorities, go and ask the minorities in your workplace what you can do to make it more inclusive. Go and ask your minorities to be involved in a policy and procedure review. Go and set up safe spaces like they have in Google and Twitter and everything else, where people can go and talk about those systemic issues that are existing in their organization, which are creating bigger or higher instances of negative outcomes for people who are in the minority as opposed to people who are in the majority. It's that simple, and I think that the really frustrating thing is people try and make this so much more complicated than it is. I'm still trying to understand why that is. Is there a capitalist side of it or what? I'm honestly not sure, but it's that simple. Just go and talk to people, and that's how you make a more inclusive environment for all of the people you have in that diverse environment. That's fine.
If you don't have a Black resource group in your company, start one. Talk to your senior leaders. Start talking to people. If you feel really strongly about it, start one. You don't have to be a person of color. If you're not a person of color, then you can talk to the people of color in your company and be an ally to that research group.
Great advice. Anyone else? That's the last question, so you can go.
I think
this is the last time I'm going to speak.
I think it's important, because I do agree with the asking piece, but I think it's also important to listen. If someone gives you a response, that's the response. Like, you need to accept it. And it's not a case of, oh, well, that's not a big deal, or I've never seen that. There's a lot of like, I've never seen that, I've never witnessed that, I've never heard that. It's like, but of course you haven't if you're a white person, because you're operating in different conversations. And it's very unlikely that Black peers will have that conversation with you unless they feel that they can trust you, and that they can trust you not to minimize their experience. So I think it's a case of being proactive, but also understanding when you need to be receptive, and just actually accept that there may be structures that you may have inadvertently or maybe purposefully contributed to that people felt excluded at kind of the least, or at worst very negatively and violently impacted. It could be small things, maybe comments on appearance, hair, clothing, accent. It could be bigger things, as Toju was kind of giving the example around feedback and kind of the language of feedback and how you're kind of perceived as that angry Black woman. But I think there is something in there in terms of, if you've asked a question and you get an answer, it's not on you to like the answer or not. You just need to accept the answer for what it is, and then try and rectify the situation. So I think that is vital, because I have seen conversations where people in power have said, oh, I want to hear all your concerns, all your thoughts. Thoughts are voiced, and he says, oh, I've never seen that. Case closed, done. Which is worse, because then people have actually exposed their trauma to you, and you've just completely dismissed it. So it's actually worse than if you'd done nothing at all. So I do think that there has to be a little bit of self-acceptance, and also shifting, like making space for people, accepting that there's talented people in your work pool, hiring them, promoting them, ensuring that you're creating an environment that is conducive to those things as well. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I'm glad to see it start.
Thank you. And we have a little update on the question about the white savior. You can read that. I think it's not the Q&A is not the best place to discuss about it, but I think we're running like 5 minutes late, which means that we're on time. So well done, everybody, for doing this. We can now talk about this in the little tables. I think it's the networking time, so we can talk about all of this just later. And Teresa, thank you.
I just came to thank everyone. This was really, really amazing. And you can see from the comments that I think everyone learned a lot. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time. And yeah, like Sophie said, we still have about 25 minutes. 5 minutes late is for events like this. So we have about 25 minutes to talk on the networking kind of base. But yeah, thank you again. I'm not even going to try and add anything to it, because I think this was brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Virtual clap. I can see you. We'll be able to see it on the live.
Exactly. All right, then. I'm going to move us back to the tables, and I hope you can all stay and have a chat with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Well done for doing this.
Thanks.